The carriage went off the road before anyone in the house woke. She reached him first. He opened his eyes and knew her face before he knew his own name.
Fenmarsh was a village with more opinions than residents, and Brindle Hall had just given it a fresh one to argue about. The estate had changed hands that spring, sold, not inherited, to a shipping merchant nobody in the parish had met. Edmund Sorrel arrived that night to see the house he'd bought, alone, ahead of his own household staff, driving the estate road himself because he trusted no one else with a horse he didn't yet know. The village had opinions about that, too. A man who'd made his money in cargo holds, buying the house that had belonged to a family with 300 years of land behind it. Nobody had decided yet whether to be impressed or offended, so Fenmarsh was doing both at once, loudly, in the church aisle and the market square alike.
Ivy Calloway ran her father's apothecary shop 2 miles down that same road, though ran undersold it. She'd been mixing tinctures and setting small bones since she was 12, since her father's hands had started shaking too badly to trust with a lancet. Nobody in the village had opinions about her one way or the other, which suited her better than they knew. She always tied her sleeves back with a plain braided leather cord before she touched anyone's wound, her father's old one, a habit that had nothing to do with modesty and everything to do with not wanting good linen in her way. She was walking home past the turn in the road, later than she meant to be, when she heard the wheels leave the gravel.
The carriage had gone into the ditch on its side, one wheel still spinning. Ivy didn't stop to call for help. She climbed down into the wreck herself, found the door by feel, and pulled. He came out heavier than she expected, bleeding from somewhere near his hairline she couldn't see well enough to judge. In the scramble, her cord snagged and tore loose against the broken doorframe. She didn't stop to notice it was gone. She got him flat, pressed her own sleeve hard against the wound, and kept talking to him in the low, steady voice she used on frightened horses and frightened men, which she had learned were nearly the same animal. His eyes opened twice before they stayed open.
The second time, they found her face and held there, and didn't move to anything else, not the wrecked carriage, not his own hands, not the blood soaking into her cuff. She told him she needed to fetch help. He caught her wrist before she could stand. "Don't go. You're the only thing I know right now." Dr. Prynne arrived within the hour, summoned by a groom who'd finally come looking for the missing carriage. He was a careful, thorough man, and not an unkind one, but he'd practiced medicine in Fenmarsh for 11 years, and an apothecary's daughter treating a gentleman's head wound before a proper doctor arrived was, in his professional opinion, a liability dressed up as luck. "You had no business touching him without a physician present," he told Ivy the next morning at the shop. "If he died under your hands instead of mine, it's your family's license that suffers for it, not your instinct."
"He wasn't going to survive me fetching you first," Ivy said. "I made a choice. I'd make it again." She didn't raise her voice to say it, which somehow made it land harder than shouting would have. Prynne didn't argue further. He simply looked at her the way a man looks at a fact he can't file anywhere useful, nodded once, and went to check his patient's dressing instead.
Edmund, still unsteady, still unable to produce his own surname without visible effort, sat through all of it in the corner of the shop and said nothing until Prynne had gone. Then, dryly, "For a man who apparently owns a house near here, I seem remarkably easy to replace." Ivy tried to leave the room twice, once to fetch water, once to give him privacy to dress the wound himself. Both times he asked her, plainly, to stay a moment longer, and both times she did.
"I don't actually know why you stopped for me," he admitted. "I don't know much of anything tonight, but I know that." "Then that's something," she said. Hold on to it. 9 days later, Edmund came to the apothecary shop himself, on his own 2 feet, to settle his account. The salve, the bandages, the hours of her time nobody had billed him for yet. A practical errand. Nothing more, he told himself on the walk down. Ivy was alone behind the counter, grinding something bitter-smelling with a mortar she didn't look up from. You didn't need to come yourself. I'd have sent the bill up to the house. I wanted to see the shop that fixed me, he said. And I wanted to ask you something Prynne wouldn't answer honestly. She set the pestle down.
You didn't panic, he said. Everyone who's come near me since that night has either fussed or flinched. You didn't do either. You put your sleeve on a bleeding stranger's head and talked to him like the outcome wasn't in question. And it worked. Because you made it work, not because I was lucky. I have built a shipping company out of staying calm when other men panicked, and I have never once watched anyone do it better than you did.
On a dark road, for a man whose name you didn't even know yet. Ivy said nothing for a long moment. She reached under the counter, took out a small dressing kit she'd already prepared. Clean linen, salve, instructions written in her own hand for changing it, and set it in front of him without a word. Then she went back to the mortar and let him let himself out. He paid the account in full that afternoon and said nothing further about it. A quiet, practical closing of one small debt. 9 more days passed.
Then a carriage from Brindle Hall pulled up outside the shop. His own, driven carefully, at a walking pace, nothing like the last one. The driver carried in a small parcel and set it on the counter. Her father's leather cord, found at last when the wrecked carriage was finally cleared from the ditch. Cleaned, mended where it had torn, with no note attached beyond the driver's short message that Mr. Sorrel had thought she might want it back. Ivy turned it over in her hands for a long time before she tied it back around her wrist. 3 weeks after the accident, a carriage came down the estate road again, slower this time, careful of the exact turn where the ground still hadn't fully healed. Edmund stopped it himself, at the same bend, on purpose, and stepped down to where Ivy stood waiting, because he had asked her to be there.
Because this time, she had a reason to say yes that had nothing to do with an emergency. I know my own name again, he said. Yours, I never had to relearn. He took the mended cord from her wrist, gently, and tied it back on himself. Not to bind a wound this time, just to have done, once, the same thing she'd done for him. Deliberately. In daylight, where anyone could see. The first time, the road had thrown them together by accident. This time, he'd chosen the exact same bend, on purpose. Thank you for staying with this one until the end. Next week, a lighthouse keeper's daughter, a shipwreck no one survived, and a name carved into driftwood that shouldn't exist. Stay close.